Hi everyone, my name is Sienna and this is Sienna Reacts. So today we're back with a pretty interesting video. It's called Top 10 Historical Facts That Aren't True. I'm not quite sure if this is going to be like worldwide or if it's going to be specifically about the US, or I'm not quite sure how this is going to go, but I'm interested to see what they say. I work in tech. I am not a history person. So don't come for me. I will block you. Okay. Anyway, let's go ahead. Let's get started.
Simon Whistler, you're watching Top 10's Net, and in the video today we're looking at the top 10 historical facts that aren't actually true. Number 10. Columbus was the first European to discover America.
The Vikings came in like the 1100s or something like that.
While this old belief has been largely expunged from the historical record today, at one point it was believed as a fact by generations of school children and is still maintained as true by some adults even today. Of course, the truth is that the Vikings preceded Columbus by centuries and may have even built small villages in the New World hundreds of years before Columbus was born. Even if that weren't the case, however, from a purely technical perspective, Columbus never actually touched foot onto what is today the United States.
It was in the Caribbean.
Spending all of his time in the East Indies.
Or something?
Number 9. People in Columbus's time thought that the world was flat.
Not just in Columbus's time.
Closely related to the belief that Columbus discovered America is the belief, again less prevalent today than it was half a century ago, that most people in his day believed the Earth was flat, and if Columbus sailed too far out, he would fall off its edge. In reality, the notion that the Earth was flat had been refuted by the ancient Greeks, who were even able to calculate its circumference with astonishing precision, and so was not held to be a fact by any but the most primitive cultures at the time. Number 8. Hitler seized power in Germany by force.
Wrong. He was elected, right? At least to like chancellor or something like that. Yeah, it wasn't a force. They voted him in. But it was because of, you know, the hard times post World War I and depressions and anyway, yeah.
Many people hold the misconception,
but not force,
that the Nazis seized power in Germany, but nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is that the Nazis came to power through free and fair elections, and even used the democratic process to secure that power. In effect, Adolf Hitler, appealing to the very legitimate grievances and fears of the German people, used the ballot box to achieve the powerful position of Chancellor, and then used that very same process to destroy democracy by having the legislature grant him the emergency powers he convinced them was necessary to restore order. Number 7. The stock market crash of 1929 started the Great Depression. Of all the misconceptions surrounding that dark era in America...
Okay, so this one is a little bit interesting because this is actually the way that it's taught in the US, or like at least when I was growing up. I don't know about now, obviously. But like they were talking, what was it, Black Friday, Black Thursday, or something like that was kind of like the kickoff to the real depression in terms of like the stock market, you know, kind of crashing and like bank runs, and there not being bank runs anymore. And then compounded on top of that, there was also the famine, and also there weren't really any like government protections in place in the early 1900s. Yeah, like we okay, how do I put it? So like we learn about Roosevelt, and we kind of learn about the different, or like the 100 Days Congress or something. Like the first 100 days, they were just like snap, 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 like rolling out all of these different programs. Yeah, so if we talk about like the 100 Days Congress and all of the social programs that they put into place across the country, then we can assume that these things didn't exist before. So there's a lack in social safety net, basically. But I'm interested to see what he puts as being the start. Yeah, I'm interested in seeing that.
In history, the idea that the crash of October 19...
Black Tuesday. I was just all the days of the week. Oh my God.
1929 kicked off the Great Depression is the most obstinate. The fact is that the Great Depression was caused by a number of factors, each of which went into making it a deeper and more enduring economic downturn than it would have been otherwise. Instead of letting the market make its own corrections and wait it out, they passed legislation, such as the Smoot-Hawley Act, that raised tariffs on imports, which was designed to make it cheaper to buy American products. The problem is they didn't anticipate that foreign governments would raise tariffs on American goods in response, thereby killing exports and forcing the mass closure of many factories. Bad government policies also caused many banks to fail, wiping out the life savings of millions of Americans, which further exacerbated the problem. Number 6. Japan had to attack America if it wanted to survive economically. The belief that Japan was largely forced into attacking the United States because of the crippling embargo...
Wait, these are myths? I'm confused. I'm sorry.
America had imposed upon it in response to its aggression in China.
So I guess it's like at some point people thought this. I guess. I think that's, yeah.
Is debatable. Japan had two options available to her other than attacking the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. First, it could have negotiated an end to her 4-year-long war with China, which Japan was unwilling to do, or it could have simply seized the oil and mineral riches of the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia, and the Malay Peninsula directly without involving America at all. Consider for a moment that if the US was unwilling to go to war in Europe to assist Great Britain in its struggle with Nazi Germany, what were the chances Congress could have been persuaded to take on the Japanese over the Dutch East Indies and Malaysia? Number 5. If Lee had won at Gettysburg, the South would have won the Civil War. It is widely believed that the Union victory at Gettysburg in July...
I don't think it was Gettysburg that was the biggest issue. I'm spitballing. But I don't think Gettysburg was the biggest issue. Yeah, like it would have been, I guess, like it would have helped morale, but the biggest issue I would think would be in the South and losing in the South. And I think around that time would have been when I forget the names of these cities, but like they were losing control of the Mississippi, and if you lose control of the Mississippi, that means you lose control of supply lines, and I think that was one of the bigger issues. Testing myself, spitballing. I'm gonna be wrong. I'm sorry. Don't listen.
July of 1863 prevented the North from complete collapse, but a careful look at the overall strategic situation at the time demonstrates this to have been unlikely. First, even if Lee had routed Meade's army at Gettysburg, they would have come at considerable cost, especially considering the number of Union troops Lee faced, over 90,000 compared to his own 70,000 men. This means that even if he had been victorious, Lee would have emerged from the battle with a largely exhausted and depleted force left with which to march on Washington almost 100 miles away. Additionally, Gettysburg would have been only the first in a string of obstacles he would have had to overcome as he moved east. Eventually, he would have to retreat back into Virginia in any case, and though he could add another Confederate victory to the long list of victories Lee had enjoyed up to that point in the war, the South simply couldn't match the North's almost unlimited industrial capability and was doomed to eventually lose in any case. Number 4. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves.
Incorrect. Sorry. I'm not sure what they're going to say, but the Emancipation Proclamation was simply freeing the slaves in the South, but the majority of states in the South had already succeeded, so the Emancipation Proclamation actually didn't do anything because it didn't apply to them, because the states weren't a part of the U.S. at the time. Anyway, keep going.
Most students grow up believing that the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves, but it did no such thing. First of all, it only applied to slaves living within the Confederate States, and since the North had no power to enforce the proclamation in those territories not under its direct control, it really had no immediate effect on freeing anyone.
Right, and then you had Kentucky didn't succeed, so there were still enslaved people in Kentucky, in Indiana, there were people are always the North didn't have slaves, but the North actually did, or they were treated as kind of house girls or something to that effect, rather than you're out in the fields picking some kind of crop or something like that. So no.
In fact, it didn't even free those slaves in the northern states, where slave ownership, while uncommon, was still legal. It was only illegal to buy and sell slaves in the North, not own them. It would take the 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, to do that, and it applied throughout the country, not just parts of it. Number 3, Lindbergh was the first person to fly across the Atlantic. While Lucky Lindy won fame and fortune for his daring solo jaunt across the Atlantic in 1927, he was far from the first to cross the ocean by air. In fact, 2 British pilots, Alcock and Brown, had made the crossing years earlier in a repurposed RAF bomber. They flew from St. John's, Newfoundland to Galway, Ireland in just under 16 hours in 1919. That flight paved the way for commercial transatlantic aviation and made Lindbergh's future flight possible. Further, just a couple of weeks after the British duo had made their flight, the British airship R-34, with a couple of dozen crew and passengers on board, made a double crossing, taking about 4 days to cross both ways. In fact, by the time Lindbergh made his world-famous crossing, close to 80 men had already made the epic journey. His, however, was done entirely solo, and clocking in at almost 34 hours of straight flying time was a far more challenging and grueling feat. Number 2, Custer's 7th Cavalry was wiped out at Little Bighorn. While many assume that Custer's entire command was wiped out at the Battle of Little...
Is this from General Custer's last stand? Is that what this is? Is this America? I'm not sure. But yeah, so spitballing, because I don't know if this is actually the same place and the same thing that we learned. It's interesting because we learned it as Custer's last stand. That's how it was taught when I was in school. When I was in middle school, but then we talked about it again in high school. And I guess if this is what I think it is, they actually it literally during that time, the nomenclature actually changed, and the way that people discussed the battle had changed literally from my middle school to high school experience talking about it, and it went from the last stand into the Battle of Little Bighorn. But I'm not sure if this is the exact same thing, but just an interesting fact.
Little Bighorn in June of 1876, the truth is that less than half of the 647 men under his command were killed in the famous battle. The reason for this was twofold. First, some of his men were assigned to drive and guard the lengthy wagon train that followed in the army's wake, and so were too far away at the time to be involved. And secondly, Custer had divided his command between himself and Major Reno in an effort to make a two-pronged attack. Reno's assault, which preceded Custer's by an hour or so, was driven off with heavy casualties, but most of it emerged from the battle intact. It was only those companies that rode with Custer, about 210 men in all, that were entirely wiped out. Number 1. The USA was chiefly responsible for defeating Germany in World War I and World War...
Who said that? Who said that? Literally... no. Who said that?
2. While American material and military support was imperative and likely ensured an eventual Allied victory, it was others who bore the brunt of the fighting against Germany in both wars.
Yes.
In World War I, the US was late to the show, not making it to France in significant numbers until late in 1917. It was the British and French who had been doing all of the fighting up until then, and had battered the Germans by the time the US entered the fray. In the Second World War, things were much the same, with American troops not arriving in theatre until very late in the war. While they fought largely rearguard actions in North Africa and Italy, by the time they landed in force in France in June 1944, the Germans were already reeling from the massive Soviet juggernaut that was rolling over them from the east. In fact, over 80% of all German casualties in World War II came on the Eastern Front. While it was the US that was chiefly responsible for defeating Japan in the Pacific, it was the Soviet Union that did most of the heavy lifting in Europe. So I really hope you found that video.
That one's weird, because literally no one says that. Yeah, like literally, where the way that it's taught here in the US is Roosevelt did not want to go to war, or World War II specifically, like did not want to go to war, tried anything and everything to kind of like stay out of it. Like, sure, we'll give you supplies, sure, we'll give you money, but we're not sending people over. And it didn't really become, okay, we have to actually send men until like Pearl Harbor, or that's how it's taught here. I'm obviously not a historian. Not a historian, but that's kind of how it's taught here. So to say, on one hand, to be saying like, oh, the Americans defeated Germany, or like they were the most important part of defeating the Axis powers, and then at the same time saying the US didn't want to be involved and didn't want to, have anything to do with it at all. That doesn't really make any sense. But this was really interesting. It makes me think about some things, because the way that it's taught in the way that it's taught when I was growing up and the way that it's taught now is quite different. So I'm always interested in seeing how things have changed in that, 5 years. Like it's only been 5 years since I was in like elementary school, sure. But anyway, let's go ahead. Let's end here. If you are like a history person, was there anything that got wrong or anything that was just like not on the right path about? If so, please let me know in the comments. I do read everything. I may not get to responding to everything, but I do see everything. But anyway, let's go ahead. Let's end here. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Okay, so bye bye.